Hello and welcome back to the Demon Den podcast. I'm your host, Janae. So today's case is the Baraboo Bone Breaker. I have had a hard time saying that, so if I mess it up, my apologies. But this is the case of Thad Phillips and Chris Steiner. So the motivation behind this case and covering this case was I just broke my ankle recently, like a month ago, and I just went through ankle surgery. And just like the whole process, for some reason, kind of reminded me of this case of this boy who enjoyed the sound of breaking people's bones. So I wanted to research it more. I feel like I had heard a lot about it, but I really went into depth, into a deep dive. And the case is so crazy. Like, it really is one of the craziest cases as far as like fetishes and acting upon them goes. So yeah, let's not talk too much and let's just get right into it. So this case begins with a 14-year-old boy named Christian or Chris Steiner who went missing on July 4th, 1994 in Baraboo, Wisconsin. Chris's mother had woken up that morning and realized that he was not home or in his bed. And this was odd because that morning Chris was supposed to work a 7 a.m. shift at McDonald's, so he would have no reason to not be home. And just in general, like, he was a young boy, it was the morning, and he wouldn't have a reason to not be home. And so after looking around the whole house, he was nowhere to be found. However, a window screen in his room was sliced open and both the front and back door were open. There were also footprints outside of the slashed window and muddy footprints throughout the house. So this clearly looked like somebody had come in through the window and walked through the house and out of the door. Police at first, despite the evidence, somehow chalked it up to a runaway situation, but the parents knew that wasn't the case, and eventually the police kind of realized that maybe this was something more. I'm not sure how they could have thought otherwise given the state of the house, but aside from that, Chris had no reason to run away. He was young, he was happy, he just started work to save up some money, which he was excited for. It was the summertime, he was having fun, he was excited to start 9th grade. He was a regular boy in 1995, just living his life. He had no reason to run away. And you just know your kids. The mom knew. He didn't have a reason to run away, okay? So I just feel like there are so many cases where parents know that their kid wouldn't run away and it's just not taken seriously by cops because on paper it looks like they ran away. Like, a parent will know if their kid, in most cases, obviously sometimes parents don't know, but I feel like there's just so many times that police fuck around because it looks like a runaway and they're not listening to the parents, or the parents say he would not run away, you know? A few days later, on July 10th, 2 jet skiers found a body in the Wisconsin River that had been caught on a tree. The body was so decomposed and bloated that they had to identify it via dental records. However, they soon discovered that the body belonged to Chris Steiner. The decomposition of his body made it difficult to figure out if anything besides drowning had happened to him, so at the time, the death was ruled an accident and the case was closed. We would later find out that another boy named Joe Clark had abducted 14-year-old Chris Steiner, and he would go on to hold him captive for 5 days. During these 5 days, Joe Clark tortured Chris by dislocating the joints in both his legs and feet. And unfortunately, we don't know the full extent of what happened to Chris while he was alive because Chris is not here to tell us. And Joe, to this day, says that he didn't do anything to him. So he's not telling us what happened. So we don't really know what actually happened to this boy. But based on the story I'm about to tell you, it was probably absolutely insane. But because Joe had broken and dislocated all of Chris's leg and feet bones, he could not swim or keep himself afloat, so he did end up drowning in the water. So not only did this boy suffer torture inflicted on him, but he also had to suffer that feeling of being thrown into the water alive and not being able to save himself because he could not swim. So that was probably one of the scariest feelings ever, on top of what he had probably just gone through. So this was only the first act of Joe Clark, who would later be named the Baraboo Bone Breaker. On July 28th, 1995, over a year later, the father of a 13-year-old boy named Thaddius, or Thad Phillips, woke up around 4 a.m. to find his son missing from their home, also in Baraboo, Wisconsin. The last time he had seen Thad was watching some TV in the living room with his 5-year-old sister, who was still asleep on the couch. But now she was alone, and Thad was nowhere to be found. Thad's belongings and shoes were also still in the house, so it looked very strange. Where was Thad? Obviously, the dad was wondering. So his parents spent that whole day searching all over the town in places they thought he may have been, but they were not able to find him. But little did they know that he was less than 2 miles away inside the home of 17-year-old Joe Clark. Joe had come into their house, the Phillips house, that Friday night and picked Thad up off the couch and carried him outside of his house. Thad was still half asleep and thought it was his dad carrying him into his room at first, but then he realized he was outside and standing next to him wasn't his dad. It was Joe Clark. So at this point, Thad is still groggy, but he's being led by Joe Clark down the street and into his home and then into Joe's second-story bedroom. So at this point, Thad is in Joe's home and he's awake now. So at first he was groggy, he had no idea what was going on, but now he's in the house and he's looking around like, okay, what's going on here? Why am I in your house? It's I think 12 o'clock at night at this point. So also, he just got picked up by a random kid in his house that he doesn't even know. Thad did not know Joe. They lived in the same neighborhood, but they were 4 years apart in age. And Thad and his family had just moved to Baraboo, Wisconsin, I think a week prior. So he didn't really know anybody at this point. So he just kind of assumed maybe it was a family friend or just something. I think he was really just trying to make some sort of sense of this weird situation and trying to rationalize why this boy would have just picked him up from his house, But Joe told Thad he just wanted to hang out, and that's why he brought him there. He said he was having a party soon and wanted to show him the stuff he had planned for it, which is okay, so you pick me up off my couch in the middle of the night to do this? What? But he did mention a few names of boys that I guess Thad did kind of recognize to some degree in the area, so he kind of started getting a little bit more comfortable as you could be in the situation. But Joe also started showing him baseball cards, and he was talking normally and fine. Everything seemed as normal as this situation could be at first. So Thad kind of went along with this for a minute, probably because he was freaked out and didn't really know what to do. But eventually things started becoming weird. It went from casual talking about parties and baseball cards to something a lot more sinister. Joe all of a sudden had a major personality switch and suddenly gets very angry and throws Thad on the bed and grabs his ankles and pushed it back all the way back until his bones snapped. Thad at this point knew he had to get out of here, so he managed to get up at this point. And he was probably filled with adrenaline. So he was able to run down the stairs. And he said that he didn't feel pain, but he felt his broken ankle shift further and further up his leg as he ran down the steps. That sounds so painful. But he began running to the door downstairs, but Joe caught up to him and picked him up and threw him on the couch in the living room. Then he took Thad's leg, his whole leg, and bent it all the way back. He put all of his body weight on it until Thad's femur broke. If you don't know, the femur bone is the largest bone in your body. It's the big bone in your thigh that connects your hip and your knee. And it's not easy to break. You need a lot of pressure to break that bone. And when you do break it, it's extremely painful. Honestly, later on when doctors saw this, they said it looked like the pressure of a car accident happened to Thad. That's how much force Joe really had to put in to break that bone. And that's crazy. So at this point, Thad had passed out on the couch from the pain. When he woke up, Joe acted normal, nothing had happened. He was calm and he was friendly again. Like I said, he'd have these personality switches a lot. They happen a lot in the 2 days. 1 minute Joe would be calm and friendly, then all of a sudden he would be filled with anger and rage for seemingly no reason some of the time. And when he was in that rage personality switch, that's when the bone breaking would happen. So it kind of sounded like he had multiple personality disorder. I don't really know, but something was very wrong with this teenager. But at this point, Thad is in so much pain, he's confused and he's scared and he just wants his parents. So he asked Joe, can he please use the phone to call him? And to his surprise, Joe said yes. Joe handed the phone to Thad, and as Thad was dialing the number, Joe goes over to the phone cord and cuts it with a smile on his face. So not only was he physically torturing him, but he also got off on mentally torturing him as well. At this point, Thad has lost all hope, and he's only focused now on surviving this. And one of the ways that he thought that he could do so was by just talking normally to Joe and playing along with him. So when Joe was in his nice talkative friendly face, Thad would try to have normal conversations with him. So at this point, they're both sitting on the couch after Joe had just broken Thad's femur bone, and they started talking. And this is when Joe revealed to Thad that he had done this before to 2 other boys. One of the boys being Chris Steiner, who we talked about earlier in this episode. The other boy is unnamed, but basically he's admitting to torturing Chris, just like he's torturing Thad, and then he also admitted to killing Chris. So Joe told Thad that he enjoyed hearing the sounds of bones breaking, which is why he was doing this. Thad had asked Joe, well, why don't you just try to break your own bones then? Why do you, why do you need to break other people's bones? Joe said that he did try to break his own bones, but he can never get the angle right. But I feel like that's kind of bullshit at the same time, because you should know, if you break a bone, it takes a long time for that bone to heal. So imagine, like, every time he had the urge to hear a bone break, he would break his own bone and then have to deal with the recovery time each and every time just to break it again when he wanted to hear it again. Like, that was not going to work. So I highly doubt that he really would be breaking his own bones, even if he could. But it's obvious that he also did enjoy the aspect of torture as well. So that also goes to, he's not going to break his own bones. He liked breaking other people's bones, and he liked the torture and seeing them get tortured as well. During this conversation, Joe randomly started to get angry again. And you know what that means. So he took Thad upstairs, put him back on the bed, and proceeded to break his other ankle. This time, though, Thad got like a rush of energy and he started to fight back. He started punching Joe. But then Joe took a pillow and smothered him, threatening him not to do that again, or obviously he's going to hurt him worse. After this, like right after this, Joe became nice again and gathered some materials to actually wrap Thad's injuries up. I think he got some bandages and some leg braces. So as he's tending to Thad's broken bones, Joe said, I love to break bones, but I also like to fix them. So he enjoyed trying to mend the bones or like wrap them up just to break them again. So this process of breaking, fixing, the bones lasted for both days Thad was there. Joe at some point put Thad on the floor and jumped up and down on his chest, breaking his ribs. And he also broke his hips. During these attacks, Joe would masturbate, because this whole thing of breaking the bones and torturing sexually turned him on as well. That alone just shows that he's just a very sick individual, and it's more than just the sound of breaking bones. He sexually gets aroused and he's turned on by torture, and that is sociopathic. Later that first night, Joe had told Thad he was having his girlfriend over, and Thad thought since he was distracted, or he would be distracted, maybe he could try to escape again. So at this point, Thad has broken hips, ribs, a broken leg, and both ankles are broken. But he still had use of his arms. Somehow, Thad managed to put the pain to the side, and he army crawled his way to the stairs using just his arms. The only way he can get downstairs was by throwing himself down the stairs, so he did. So can you imagine how painful that is? That sounds unreal. I can't even imagine. So he gets downstairs and he immediately passes out from the pain. But when he comes to, he's able to crawl into the kitchen, but he hears Joe and his girlfriend sitting in the living room watching TV. At this point, he knew that he couldn't do anything without making too much noise because they were right there. So he just laid there waiting for Joe to find him. So Joe's girlfriend ends up leaving, and of course Joe found Thad in the kitchen. He was so shocked that he was there. He had no idea how he got down there. But he brought him back upstairs, but I guess he was too tired this evening to continue torturing Thad because he just told him that he was going to bed, but tomorrow he would pay for it. And the next day he did keep that promise, unfortunately. He broke some more of Thad's ribs and then also took his kneecaps and twisted them all the way around, breaking his kneecaps in half. I remember hearing or reading somewhere, I couldn't find it again, but I remember hearing when the police did end up finding him, his whole lower body was like turned completely around to the point that his backside looked like his front because his feet and knees were facing like backwards, which is crazy. But Thad begged Joe to let him go and told him he would make up a story about how he tripped and fell and that's how he got his injuries. But obviously the state that Thad was in, it's clear that wasn't just a fall. Like no fall is doing all of that. So, and Joe knew that obviously, so he said no. Obviously he wasn't going to let him go at this point for many reasons, I'm sure. On July 30th, the second day of his capture, Joe was leaving the house for the night. So to stop that from any more escape attempts, Joe put him in the closet in his room. And Thad knew he needed to try to escape. Like, he could not survive much longer. He could feel it in his body, I'm sure. And he needed to get out of this house. And he knew he just needed to be very, very careful this time so he wasn't caught. But this was the best time because Joe was leaving for the night. So he needed to use this time to escape. He was determined. He was not going to die in this house. So at this point, again, Thad's legs are completely shattered. His ankles, knees, femur, hips, along with his ribs. His legs were also so swollen from internal bleeding, he could not walk at all. But yet Joe still tied up his legs before he left the house and put him in the closet. He could not take any chances that Thad would be able to escape. Like, he just thought, like, there's no way he could escape this again. While in the closet, Thad was looking all around for something he could use to knock down the door, and he found an electric guitar. And I just want to take a moment to really applaud Thad's bravery. Like, he was only 13 years old at this point, and he fought so hard to get out of this situation. Like, I can't begin to imagine how traumatic and how insane this boy probably felt, but he was able to muster up whatever little bit of energy he had to use this guitar to bust a hole in the door and let himself out again. So now he's out of the closet, and again he army crawls back to the steps, and he's passing out every other minute. He's in horrible shape from the breaks, the internal bleeding, and Thad also was worried that Joe was going to poison him, so he refused to eat or drink anything, going on 2 days now. So he is extremely weak. But eventually he gets to the stairs and has to throw himself down again. And I have to stop one more time and just say, I don't know how he was able to do this once, let alone twice. I just broke my ankle like a month ago. Literally just like a fracture, and absolutely nothing compared to this, obviously. But the smallest tasks, like going to the bathroom or getting out of bed, is so hard. Like, some days I will literally hold my pee in just because I don't want to do the process of, like, getting up, getting to the bathroom. Like, it's just a lot. And I can imagine the strength that he had to muster up with all those injuries to be able to do that twice now, for a second time, with his whole body broken. The adrenaline and the will to live must have been out of this world. Like, I can't even comprehend it. But getting back to the story, Thad managed to get himself downstairs again, but he continued to pass out due to the pain and just the overall damage to his body, because at this point he was dying. But he eventually army crawled through the house and managed to get to the kitchen after a few hours. So it literally took him a couple of hours just to get from the second floor bedroom to the kitchen because of the fact that he kept passing out. But thank God Joe was not coming home that night, so he didn't have to worry so much about him coming home and catching him, which was good. He just needed to survive long enough to get to that phone, and he managed to finally get to the kitchen phone, and it was hanging on the wall, so he had to shake the cord to get it to fall down. Thank God it was one of the phones that had the buttons on the receiver and not on the wall, so he was able to call the police, who traced the call and arrived 30 minutes later. They found him laying on the kitchen floor, like, completely mangled. And because of the severe internal bleeding, paramedics said if 2 more hours had passed, he would have died from his injuries. He was in such bad shape. At the hospital, they did multiple surgeries to try to save his legs and control the internal bleeding. His legs were so shattered and damaged, they thought they might have to amputate them. So he would end up spending weeks in the ICU. But in the time that Thad is being rushed to the hospital and initially treated, Joe Clark is arrested at a house party. He's literally just partying it up while this is all happening. So he's arrested on kidnapping charges right now. So when they did question him about Thad, he admitted to taking Thad, but he said that they were just hanging out and that he's completely blacked out and he did not remember hurting him at all. He denied anything, and I think he even tried to say that Thad broke his own bones. Like, are you fucking kidding me? This kid walked himself to your house to break his own bones in your bedroom. That's what we're going with? Like, he's such a piece of shit. Like, he makes me sick. Obviously, police did not believe this because it's stupid and found out that he had been stalking Thad for a while, and he waited until his parents' car was not there and he thought that they were not home to go into the house and lure him out of the house. I believe Thad's parents were home, though. I don't know why the car wasn't there, but for whatever reason, Joe thought Thad's parents were not home that night, which is why he chose that night to go get him. But while in the hospital, Thad told his father how Joe had admitted to killing 2 other boys. All he could remember was one of the boys' names was Chris. So Thad's father started reading out names to him in the phone book to try to figure out who the boy was. When his father read the name Chris Steiner, Thad knew immediately that was him. But unfortunately, he could not remember the name of the other boy Joe had told him about, and to this day, he still cannot remember the name. Obviously, they took this information to the police, and the police ended up exhuming Chris's body and performed an x-ray on him and found out that he had very similar injuries to Thad's, including the breaks to his knees and ankles. When they first found his body, remember, they found it in the river, and he was very bloated and decomposed, so they didn't notice this at first. But The bone breaking wasn't the only similarities. Chris's mother, at the time of his disappearance, started doing her own investigation since the police ruled his death accidental. She did not believe this. Like I said, she knew that something else happened. So she had gone around town asking neighbors about anybody suspicious or asking anybody if they would happen to know anything. And a lot of kids in the town brought up Joe Clark's name because Joe was a big, well-known bully in town. And he constantly taunted the boys in the neighborhood, clearly enough to the point where they were like, Joe Clark, look into him. He may have done it. If something happened to Chris, it was probably him. So she also said that she suspected Joe Clark as well because he was the last one to talk to Chris. And Joe wanted to hang out with Chris the night that Chris disappeared, but Chris said no. So I don't really know if they were friends or if they just knew each other somehow. I didn't really see any more into that. But for whatever reason, the mom thought that Joe Clark was suspicious too. So things are starting to come together at this point, and now police have gotten a search warrant for Joe's house. So they found a few things in there, like the braces and all the stuff alluding to the broken bone injuries and stuff, but two things were the most concerning. The first thing was they found sketches of interiors of different homes in the area. I don't know how he had those sketches and how he knew what their houses looked like, but that was very strange. And then they also found 3 lists. One list was titled Get To Now. So it was spelled now, but they think he might have meant to write Get To Know. So it's either Get To Now or Get To Know. The other list was Can Wait, and then the last list was Leg Thing. And each list has names of 25 to 30 different boys in the town, which is insane. Like, it literally was a list of boys he was going to target. So I don't know what the Leg Thing list is referring to. I don't even know if I want to know, but obviously it was probably something horrific. But the other 2 lists were clear as day. It was lists of boys that he planned to get to next, which is so chilling because who knows how many more victims there would have been if it wasn't for Thad Phillips getting out of that house and telling the police about this. This whole thing to me is just even crazier because Joe Clark himself is only 17 years old. He preyed on younger boys because they were easy to bully and take advantage of, probably. But he himself, he was still young. Like, 17 is still young, and you have to think, like, how does such a young person have such strong desires like this and act on them? So it's also not clear why he only targeted boys and not girls, so I wonder if there is a reasoning behind that. But another big question is, where are his parents during all of this? He's doing all of this at home, and it seems like his parents were nowhere to be found. Well, his parents were not home that night that Joe brought Thad to the house, or I don't think they were home for a couple days because they were visiting their daughter or something who didn't live in the house. It wasn't super clear, but basically Joe had just been left home alone. But aside from that, it seemed his parents were extreme alcoholics and drug users. When police went to Joe's house, there were beer bottles everywhere, and they even found a journal of Joe's where he wrote entries about his parents' alcoholism, and it seemed like it upset him a lot, like he was venting a lot in his journal, so he was probably very neglected for no telling how long, and he probably didn't have much guidance at all. Like, it seemed like he had a very bad home life, which is common for people who commit these heinous crimes. He said his mother got drunk every night to the point of passing out, which she denied, but it's like not uncommon for alcoholics to lie about the severity of their issues, especially if she's being questioned in connection to her son being a murderer. But despite his age and situation, Joe was tried as an adult due to the sheer brutality of this crime. But the question still remained, why is he doing this? We know he likes the sound of bones breaking, but what caused him to be this way? One of the defenses that Joe's team tried to use was that he was involved in some sort of dirt bike accident where he was thrown several feet, which resulted in some head trauma. And then another defense was that his parents were alcoholics, like I said, and his mother drank while she was pregnant with Joe, so maybe it caused some type of chemical imbalance in his brain. So Joe did try to plead not guilty due to mental defect. So they tried to determine during this trial, I guess, if he was mentally stable. And his defense really tried to push this head trauma idea from the dirt bike accident. Both of his parents claimed that after the accident, he started to act very differently. But honestly, the court didn't really trust their word because it came out that they were alcoholics. And especially the prosecution did try to discredit the parents a lot because of that. The prosecution also pointed out how up until this point, Joe's parents didn't try to get him any help. You know, like before he was put on trial, before he was accused of torturing and murder, they didn't try to fix any damage that could have come from this dirt bike accident. So like, of course now they were trying to say like, of course now you're going to try to use that as an excuse, but clearly it wasn't bad enough because you didn't try to help him out before he committed these heinous crimes, you know? Like if it was so bad, you would have tried to do something, but there was nothing. Like they didn't take him to like doctors. They didn't do anything. So the defense really didn't have a case, and honestly, the list they found when searching Joe's home with the boys' names on it was damning enough. Like, that was case closed, pretty much. Like, he literally had a hit list in his house. Joe later said that list was bogus, whatever that's supposed to mean. But even the witnesses they brought out for testimony, like the defense, were just regular people vouching for Joe, saying like, he's a good guy, like stuff like that. Like there were no expert opinions. Even doctors who were put on the stand said the clot that Joe got in his brain as a result of the dirt bike accident was healed. It wasn't really bad and it didn't affect him long term. So that defense was out the window, honestly. They even had psychologists evaluate Joe for this mental defect claim, and none of them were willing to testify to support his claims. And then Thad Phillips, if he wasn't brave enough already, he also got on the stand in front of Joe and detailed all the torture he faced during those 2 days. And Thad was excited about that. Like, he was not scared of Joe Clark. He was ready to get on that stand, and he was like, I'm going to tell them exactly what he did because fuck Joe Clark, pretty much. But finally, the last testimony, like the nail in the coffin, was a forensic psychologist took the stand and said the sheer fact that he had masturbated during the torture showed that he was aroused by making people suffer, and that was the motivation. So basically, in short words, his entire defense is bullshit. He said he's just a sexual sadist who gets off on torture and the sound of bones breaking. On top of that, they had the list of the boys' names, and yeah, it was pretty much case closed. So in October of 1997, Joe Clark was found guilty of the abduction of Thad Phillips, and he had the following charges: causing great bodily harm to a child, child enticement, attempted first-degree intentional homicide, mayhem, and mental harm to a child. So I wanted to search mayhem because I didn't know what that meant. So if you don't know what mayhem means either, this is the definition. So mayhem is a serious felony involving the unlawful and malicious permanent disfigurement, disabling, or dismemberment of another person, such as cutting off a limb, disabling an organ, or permanently scarring someone. So, yeah, Joe was sentenced to 100 years in prison for the charges involving Thad. He was also ordered to pay Thad $21 million, but he didn't have that money, so Thad never actually received it, unfortunately. But about a year goes by, and Joe is now being put on trial for the murder of Chris Steiner. If you aren't already pissed, hold on to your seat right now because you are going to be livid. Thad was asked to testify again during the murder trial for Chris Steiner, but before the trial, 15-year-old Michael Hubish, I think that's how you pronounce it, a friend of Joe's, went to Thad's house and shot Thad twice in the back because he wanted revenge for Joe. Like, as if this poor boy Thad hasn't gone through enough between the torture he endured and then the extreme physical therapy he had to go through, the surgeries, he's trying to recover from that still. It took him years to recover from that. Now he just got shot in the fucking back too. Are you kidding me? Like, I literally had no words when I read that. I had to fact check that twice because it literally sounded unbelievable to me. Like, it sounded like, I was like, there's no way that this happened too. Like, a 15-year-old went and shot him in the back. Like, that is just so heartbreaking to me. But that is such a strong little boy, obviously, and he survived all of that torture. This was not going to be the thing that brought him down. So he survived those 2 shots as well, and he went on to testify against Joe. I wish I could see the look on Joe's face when Thad walked into that courtroom, boy. Like, oof, I wish I could see. Like, you tried so hard to get this boy taken out so many times, and he still walked into that courtroom and testified against you again. Like, fuck Joe Clark, for real. But Joe was found guilty of the murder of Chris Steiner as well and got an additional 50 years added on to his sentence. Despite Joe admitting to Thad that he murdered a third boy, he was never linked to any other murders. But he still, to this day, denies causing any harm to Thad Phillips, and he denies murdering Chris Steiner. But thankfully, he is still locked up to this day, and any appeal he has tried to make has been denied. If you want to know about Michael Hubish, like whatever the fuck his name is, he went to juvie for shooting Thad, but he was only 15 at the time, like I said, so he eventually got out. But then later on, he was arrested for sexual assault. So you could see the kind of person he is. He is a loser, just like his friend, Joe. But this is honestly such a crazy story. Like, I have not heard anything like this. Like I said, as far as like the fetish with the bones breaking, like that is something I've never heard before in any other case. But I just feel so bad for Thad. Like, I really do. Like I said, I just broke my ankle, so my recovery time is like 6 weeks, and I feel like just from the 6 weeks I'm going crazy. Like, everything feels so hard. It's like you're sitting here, it's annoying to have to, you can't do anything. I cannot imagine how hard his recovery must be. Oh my goodness, it probably was such a long and torturous reminder of this horrible situation that happened to you. And it took him years to recover, and even now he still has a permanent limp, but thankfully he is able to walk. He's married, he has kids, and he's just so amazing, and I can't get over how strong he is. And he really helped so many boys in that neighborhood not become a victim to Joe Clark. He deserves that $21 million that he's probably never going to get because Joe Clark can't pay him. And it's just, I just can't. This story is so heartbreaking. But that was the story of the bone breaker case, the Baraboo bone breaker. Thank you guys so much for listening. And I hope to see you in next week's episodes, which I believe is going to be a multiple parter, my first multiple parter. So thank you guys for listening.